Let's kind of continue from where we left off. I mean, that's been some time ago. And basically, we're trying to develop a fundamental understanding of the whole process of Mashiach. If you recall, we've been discussing considerably about that, the concept of the Mashiach, the concept of the process of Mashiach, and what we were supposed to go into last time is to discuss to some degree the origins of the personality of the Mashiach in Jewish history. And we began to outline in Jewish history some of the critical periods where the Mashiach could have come. And the question that we have to look into is, what exactly does that mean? And what are the points in Jewish history which point to the notion of the Messianic process? Now, I just want to conduct a very quick review again. This is to overlook what I said last time about what this is all about. We have said, very briefly, that when Adam HaRishon was first created, he was asked to do a certain specific task. And very briefly, what that task goes back to the beginning of creation itself. When the Rebbeinu Shem first created the world, or he first created existence, he did so for a reason. And without going to exhausting that reason, the Rebbeinu Shem created existence for all reality so that he could benefit or create an ecstatic condition for another being besides himself. This is the purpose of creation as we know it. The Rebbeinu Shem, who is in essence goodness himself, wants to create someone else, something else, with its own sense of self or self-awareness, and give it an eternal good, an eternal joy. And in doing so, in order to fulfill that particular desire, what the Rebbeinu Shem did was create another being called the Neshama, the soul, whose unique characteristics is that it is aware of itself. It knows that it is, in contrast to God, so that it turns around to the Rebbeinu Shem and says, you, me. And as we said before, this is an extraordinary creation. To create an object, essentially, which has the capacity to know that it is an object, as distinct from anything else, is a remarkable creation. And that's basically what the Rebbeinu Shem did. He said to the Neshama, I want to put you in a position, or put you in a particular type of situation where you will enjoy having a simcha that has no end, that goes on for all eternity. And the Neshama turned around and told the Rebbeinu Shem and said, this sounds really good, and it's very exciting, but the truth of the matter is, I can't accept it. Because for me to accept it would make me to be too uncomfortable. I have a basic discomfort with what you particularly have in mind. Why? And what the Neshama told the Rebbeinu Shem, in effect, although this is not an actual conversation that happened, but for all practical purposes, it could have happened this way. The Neshama said to the Rebbeinu Shem that since I am created in your image, since I have a sense of self-awareness, just like you do, I have a certain aspect which is similar to you. Since I'm created, in a sense, like the shadow of God, I also possess a certain element of independence. And therefore, if you want to give me an eternal state, I want to build it myself. I want to construct my own eternal life. Since I'm like you, and you're a creator, you're a giver, I'm also a creator or a giver in a small sense. And in that way, I also want to contribute to my own eternal life. So what the Rebbeinu Shem said was, fine, I will create the circumstances where you will be able to do that. And the particular circumstance that he created was, he created the body, he took the Neshama and put it into a body so that he could withdraw. Because when the Neshama is in the body, the person who is the result no longer is aware of the existence of God in a direct way. The person can only perceive or sense what he knows from the five senses. You cannot see or sense the presence of ruchnius, or spirituality, because the body makes it impossible. You can only sense what you see in the physical world. Why did God do this? Because God wanted to, in a certain sense, hide from the person. He wanted to hide from the person, and he told the person, in this case Adam HaRishon, the first man, I want you to bring me back into the world. I want you to bring me back. And the way you can bring me back into the world is by following my will, by doing, or rather, by submitting your will to my will, and by recognizing my relationship with you, and developing an intimate relationship with me, you will allow me to again preside over the world directly. And what will happen is the entire physical universe will transform so that it no longer is a barrier to the spiritual world. And this is an important principle that we mentioned a long time ago, and it's a concept called Vichoch Haguf, which few people are aware of, unfortunately, and that means the purification of the body. And what it basically means is that even though the body prevents us from connecting with Ruchnius, so that we are not aware of the existence of God in a direct way, that is only temporary. And that what happens is that in a certain time, the guf will suddenly become transparent like glass to spirituality, so that you will be able to see and feel the presence of the Bnei Shalom while you are in your guf. Most people think that in order for the person to become aware of the spiritual world, a person has to die. That's totally untrue. The reason why a person has to die is simply because of the sin of Adam Rishon. Because Adam sinned, that's why death came on the world. But if Adam had never sinned, there would never been death. That means that the person, Adam, his neshama and his guf, together would have gone into Olam Haba. Now how is that possible? How can the guf, which is a physical thing, go into Olam Haba? The answer is, the guf would have changed so that it no longer is a barrier to the spiritual world. And while a person is in his guf, suddenly he will become completely familiar with everything in the spiritual world. Now that's a strange concept, but that's essentially what's involved. That's called Vichoch Haguf. Now that's what the Monashim said to Adam Rishon. You see, he said to him, I have taken you and I have put your neshama into a guf so that you can no longer see me in the way that you should see me. But if you subject yourself to my will, if you do the mitzvah that I give you, in this case, if you don't eat from the Eitz Hadas, Tov V'Ra, you see, if you don't do that, then what you will do is you will draw down into your neshama a very powerful spiritual kedusha, or holiness, which you do not possess now, because I have taken it away from you. When I created your neshama at the outset, it was an enormously powerful being. But what I did was I confiscated a large amount of its kedusha. I took it away, and I took it in only a half state, and I put it into a body. And what I tell you now, Adam, is that if you do the mitzvah, and if you listen to what I say, and you understand who I am relative to who you are, you will bring back this kedusha into your neshama. And as soon as that kedusha comes back down into your neshama will have the ability to transform your entire physical body, so that you then can become completely aware of the presence of God as it exists in the physical world itself. Because what will happen is that the physical world itself will become Olam Haba. People want to know, where is Olam Haba? Olam Haba, first of all, is a world which has never arrived yet. Gan Eden is not the same thing as Olam Haba. Gan Eden is a temporary condition or state where the neshamas go after they separate from their body. That's what Gan Eden is. Yes, where all the souls go. Olam Haba is a place which will go on for all eternity, where all the neshamas exist or live with their bodies. But they live with their bodies in such a way that the body is totally purified and completely elevated and transformed, so that it is no longer a barrier to the spiritual world. This was the purpose of Adam. The Baruch Shem says to Adam, do the mitzvah and you will bring down a kedusha which will empower your neshama to completely transform physical reality and make from your body and from the physical universe itself a completely spiritual reality. And that spiritual reality is called Olam Haba. Let's look at this more carefully. What happened? At the outset of creation, the Baruch Shem said to the neshama of Adam Rishon, I want you to build your own Olam Haba. That's the premise. That's the premise. That's why everything you see is what you see here. The reason why we are in the world that we are today is for one basic reason. And that reason is because God says, I want to give you Olam Haba. I want to give you a condition or a state of affairs, an experience which will go on forever, which will be trouble-free, and which will be a state of total simcha. That's what God said to the neshama. But the Baruch Shem says, because of the fact that you are like me and you have certain creative features, I want you to build this world by yourself. You see, I don't want to give it to you like a present. I want you to make it yourself. That's the fundamental idea. And we won't go into the reasons for that. That's the basic idea. Because of the fact that the neshama has to construct Olam Haba by itself, the Baruch Shem created a whole different series of events. He took the neshama and put it into a prison. And that prison is called the body, the guf. What does it mean he took the neshama and put it into prison? The neshama is composed of spiritual substance. And because it's composed of spiritual substance, it's able to see and totally sense a different level of existence. When the neshama was put into a body, the body became a barrier to the neshama, so that the person who is the result of both is no longer aware of a spiritual world. He only sees what he sees through the five senses. Why did God do that? Because the Baruch Shem wants the neshama or the person to discover God. You discover God. The Baruch Shem says, I'm going to hide or withdraw, and it is your job to find me or to discover me. If you discover me, that will be your Olam Haba. That's what it is, because what is Olam Haba? Olam Haba is nothing more than a state where a person is completely aware of the Shekhinah, or completely aware of the presence of God as He exists for us. And when you are completely aware of that, that is the highest simcha which is possible. Why that's the highest simcha which is possible is a discussion at a different time, and we've already gone into that. But that's basically what we're talking about. What is Olam Haba? Olam Haba is nothing more than a situation where the neshama, which is the sense of consciousness that all of you possess, as you are, is aware of the presence of the Baruch Shem. Now you may say, so what? So what does that mean? You don't realize that, but simply to be aware of the presence of God in the way that we are capable of is automatically a source of such simcha that you couldn't begin to imagine it. It's not possible. If you imagine the highest simcha that you have now, the biggest simcha that you have now, it is an infinitesimal of what you have if you are aware of the presence of the Baruch Shem, or what they call the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is not God. The Shekhinah is the presence of God as we feel Him, but it's not the God Himself. The Baruch Shem, or God, is beyond anything we can actually feel in Himself. But in the way that He allows us to understand Him or know Him or feel Him, that's called the word Shekhinah. And the word Shekhinah comes from the word Shachen, to dwell. Lishkon, to dwell. Because that's the aspect of God which dwells among His creation. And that's the way we know Him. We know Him through what's called His Shekhinah. That's His power, so to speak. Now, the awareness of that power, or the awareness of that presence, is extraordinary. And that's what the Baruch Shem wants. But the Baruch Shem says, you have to be aware of me. You've got to create that awareness. I'm not going to make you aware of me. You're going to do it on your own. You're going to do it by yourself. So what the Baruch Shem did was, first I'll hide the Shekhinah. I'll hide it. How am I going to hide it? I'll hide it so that you will be in a physical universe no longer aware of the presence of the Shekhinah as it should be. It's your job to bring it back. It's your job to truly become aware of the Shekhinah. You see, that's your job. How do you become aware of it? Very simply. The Baruch Shem gives you a conflict, and that conflict is to decide who is bigger, or who is more independent, you or the Baruch Shem. When the Baruch Shem says to you, or when the Baruch Shem says to other missions, don't eat from the Eitz Hadas, I tell you not to eat from this tree. You can eat from all the other trees, but don't eat from that tree. Adam had to decide, 1 minute, what's going on over here? Why can't I eat from this tree? Because God said so? So what? I'm also a koyach. I'm also somebody. And I can have my own free will to do what I want. I don't have to listen to what God says. Because I'm to some degree independent of Him. And I have my own power. So if Adam would think along those lines, he would reject the absolute presence of God and instead impose his own presence and say that my presence is more important than the presence of God. What that does is force God out. That pushes the Shekhinah away from the world. And that's very bad. Because if it pushes the Baruch Hashem away from the world, then what happens? Then the world cannot experience the Shekhinah and there is no Olam Haba. But if Adam thinks the other way and says, wait a minute, the Baruch Hashem tells me to do it, why should I listen to him? Because he's the Baruch Hashem. He created the whole world. But more than that, he is the source of existence itself. And that if I want to go on living, the source of my simcha is connecting to him. And if Adam would realize, therefore, I have to be subservient to him, let's see, is that if I listen to what he says and I love him with all my might, that is the highest simcha of all. And his will is more important than my will. So if Adam does that, what happens is the Shekhinah comes closer. How does it come closer? What happens is that a certain kedusha or spiritual power of the Shekhinah descends to the world, specifically into the neshama of Adam Rishon. As soon as that kedusha enters into the neshama, suddenly everything begins to change, and it's almost like science fiction, almost, because suddenly Adam, if he had done the mitzvah, would have observed his body and the whole physical world change right in front of him. How would it change? Suddenly the Shekhinah would have become recognizable and visible in the sense that it is. And Adam would have found himself in a whole different world, like this. Adam was created on Erev Shabbos. If he had held by the mitzvah until Shabbos, then what would happen is that the physical world as we know it would have disappeared. That's all. It would have disappeared, and the physical world would have suddenly elevated itself and become Olam Haba. The Shekhinah suddenly would have gone right back into it, and all physical matter would have transformed into like glass, so that suddenly you are aware of what's beyond the physical, and you're aware of the spiritual. Let's look at the diagram. You see, when God created man, he created him in this state, in the middle. What is that state called? It's called a state of cheson. Now the Hebrew word cheson means something which is incomplete, something which is missing. And you're right, there is something missing. When God first created Adam Rishon, there was something missing. What? The presence of God. The presence of God. Adam Rishon lived in a world where the true source of existence was missing. When I mean missing, it wasn't evident, because the body was the barrier to it. So the Baruch Hashem says, remove this cheson. Remove it and create a world of shleimus, or completion. Raise the physical world to a level of shleimus or perfection. If you do that, the Shekhinah will return. Why does the Baruch Hashem say this to Adam Rishon? Because he wants man to create his own Olam Haba. He wants man to create the eternal condition where the Shekhinah is constantly present. That's why. He doesn't want to do it for him. Now what's very important is the following. If Adam Rishon had therefore done the mitzvah, see, we don't see it that way, because when we look at the Chumash, we see what happened when he didn't do the mitzvah. And since this is Parshas Bereishis, right? We all look at Parshas Bereishis and we see what happened when Adam failed. But we have to ask ourselves the question, what happens if Adam would have succeeded? What would have happened then? You see? And the answer is, if he had succeeded, he would have transformed physical reality from a level of incompletion cheson to a level of shleimus. A kedusha would have descended into his neshama, and that power would have transformed physical reality itself, so that the substance no longer was a barrier to becoming fully aware of the Shekhinah. And when you are capable of being fully aware of the Shekhinah, while you are in your body, that is Olam Haba. You don't have to separate from your body. You don't have to die. Your neshama doesn't have to go out of its body, which is what death is, and your body goes into the ground and deteriorates. That's not necessary. Not at all. You can what? You can perceive the full level of spirituality while you are in your body, without ever moving out a centimeter.
You mean in this life?
In this world, yes. You do not have to move out. Rather, now that was the situation of Adam before he sinned. You see, if Adam didn't sin, he would never have to die or anything. He would instantly convert the physical world to a spiritual world. But that's the problem. He sinned, and because he sinned, he changed the whole situation. What did he do? What he did was the following. When Adam Rishon was first created, his body was very similar to translucent glass. I don't know if you know what translucent glass is. Translucent glass is glass that you can see through the light, but you can't see people, you can't see something else. For example, in a shower, the glass in a shower, you can't see clearly in it, but you can see a little bit in it. You can see someone's behind it, but you cannot see the clear thing. Glass which you can see through is said to be transparent. And finally, glass which you cannot see through is said to be opaque. That's black glass. So there are three different ways, or three levels of the visibility of glass. Okay? Opaque, where you cannot see through it, it's like black or painted over. Translucent, where you can see light, but you can't see other objects behind it. And transparent, where you can look out of a window. Now that's a mashal, that's an analogy to the body. When Adam Rishon was first created, his body was translucent with respect to the Shekhinah. That means that even though Adam Rishon was in his body, he was able to sense to a certain degree the presence of Kedusha while he was in his body. But he couldn't sense it totally, only a little bit, and that was an enormous amount. But there was still a certain amount missing, and the Baruch Hashem did that on purpose. The Baruch Hashem took the neshama and put it into a body which was translucent, so that Adam would feel the Baruch Hashem only a certain amount. And the Baruch Hashem said, for the rest of it, you go fetch it. You bring the rest of it. You make yourself from a translucent body and a translucent universe to a transparent body. How? By doing the mitzvah. If you would have done the mitzvah, the entire physical world would have become transparent with his body, and the Shekhinah, with its power, would have simply illuminated itself right through the body and right through the physical world. In that state, that is called Olam Haba. Now Adam did not do that. He did not go up from here to here. He failed. And because it failed, what happened was he went down. Instead of going up, he went down. When Adam sinned, he defied God and said, I deny the fact that the Baruch Hashem is the absolute source of all existence. That there was something left to me also. That was a gaiva or an arrogance. You see. How do we know that? Because the Nachash, when the Nachash or the serpent went to Chava, what argument did the Nachash use to seduce Chava? Why did Chava listen to the Nachash? What did he say that was so brilliant? He said very simple, if you eat from the Eitz HaDaat over law, you'll be like God. V'hoyiso kelokim, you do it over law. The temptation for a human being to be like God, to have a little bit of power, but true power, so that you have this power against God, so that you can take a power which even God doesn't have. That's the biggest title of all. And that's the essence of the Yetzer Hara. Arrogance. You see. Arrogance, or the smugness that a person achieves. And that's what the Yetzer Hara comes to see. The Yetzer Hara tries to convince you. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, tries to convince you that it's true you're not as big as God, but you're a little God. You're a little God. And that there's certain things that you can do that even God can't prevent. For example, if you want to go out into the world and you want to become a rich man, it's up to you. It has nothing to do with God. That's what the Yetzer Hara comes. The Yetzer Hara comes and says that whatever happens to you in this world is totally up to you. You govern your own destiny. And that's a murder Yetzer Hara because it's not true. You don't govern your own destiny. Fundamentally, it is God who determines what will happen to you, other than your free will. But in all areas, except in your free will, He determines what's going to happen. When Adam Rishon listened to Chava, who listened to the Nachash, what happened was, he did something to his body in the exact opposite direction. Instead of purifying it, he putrefied it. Meaning that instead of raising it, instead of bringing a kedusha into himself, into his neshama, so that his body would become transparent, he brought a tumah, or an impure force down. He brought the wrong force down. And when he brought this force into himself, what happened is it entered into his body. So his body became opaque with regard to ruchnius. So that which he was able to see before he sinned, he was completely blind to after. You see. Before he did the sin, his vision was not clear, but he could see. So his vision wasn't clear. So the Baruch Shem said, make your vision clear. After he sinned, he became blind. That's a whole different level. And his guf became tamei. And it's because his guf became tamei, no longer was it possible for Adam, you see, to go into Olam Haba with his guf, with his body. It was impossible. Because his guf now was contaminated with the tumah. And even if Adam would suddenly start doing mitzvahs and bring down Kedusha, it's too late. Because the body is contaminated with a tumah or an evil force. And as long as that evil force resides in the body and it resides in the world, this world cannot become an Olam Haba, and the Shekhinah cannot become visible through it. So the job is now to remove the tumah. That's the job. This tumah is called a kilkul, or a damage. Adam was supposed to take the world and perfect it. Instead, he took it and he brought it down. He damaged it. And that's called kilkul. So what God said, we've got to change the job. The original job was simply to make it higher. But since you've sinned and you've made it lower, you've got to first remove the damage. And after you remove the damage, then you can bring it higher. So, when Adam was first made, there was one step to Olam Haba. Now there are two steps. And the example I give is, for example, if you want to move into an apartment, and you want to decorate it and make it and fix it up with furniture on, that's fine. But what happens if somebody else is living in the apartment? Or the apartment is filthy and terrible? First you've got to clean it up, and then you bring in your stuff. That's exactly what happened. When Adam was first made, he was put into an empty apartment. And God said, design it, fix it up. But what Adam did was, he started taking paint and throwing it on the wall, and he damaged the apartment. So Adam couldn't design the apartment anymore. So what God says now is, now that you've damaged your apartment, first clean it up. And then you can design it the way I wanted you to. So we understand how it works. And this is the essence of everything. So since the time of Adam and Rishon, we have been involved in cleaning up the apartment. That's the reason why people die. What is death? Because what the Baruch Shem said is the following. When I took your neshama and I put it into a body, I intended for the two never to separate. And that if you would do a mitzvah, you would change the body, and that body would become your place in Olam Haba. But because you have sinned, you have contaminated that body. So therefore what I must do is separate the neshama from the body, take the body and let it deteriorate, and as it deteriorates, what happens to it? The tumah leaves. And then what the Baruch Shem says, once the tumah is out, then I will take that body again and rebuild it. And I will take the neshama and put it back in. That's called Tchiyas HaMesim, or resurrection of the dead. And that's really what it's about. Why is it that a person dies? Why is it that God said to Adam Rishon, on the day that you eat from the Eitz HaDaas Tov V'Ra, you will die? Why did he tell you to die? Is that a punishment? No, that wasn't a punishment. Death is not a punishment, although it doesn't feel very good. But death is not technically a punishment. Death is a tikkun. It's a what? It's a cure. It's a rectification. It's a way that the Baruch Shem says, once you've damaged your body, then the only way to what? To fix it up is by separating the neshama from the body and taking the tumah out of the body. So the Baruch Shem said, when I have to separate it, that's what death is about. And that's what the Baruch Shem said to Adam. On the day that you eat from the Eitz HaDaas, you will force me to fix up the body that you will have damaged. And the way that I have to fix up that body is to take the neshama out and temporarily put it in a special storage place. And that storage place is called Gan Eden. And the body I put back into the earth where it came from, it deteriorates. And then finally, when the body has finally lost all its tumah, I will rebuild the body and then take the neshama from Gan Eden where it's stored, put it back in, and presto, into the body. The Baruch Shem says, I will rebuild the body. I will take the body from the ground and reconstruct it again. That's called resurrection of death, Tchiyas HaMesim. You say that by Shemona Esrei every day when you daven. You say, Baruch Hashem, Mechaya Mesim. What does that mean, Mechaya Mesim? Why are we so keyed on God making the dead live? Who wants the dead to be live? It's enough that's what? That the neshama is in Gan Eden. What do we have to go back into our bodies for? Because the answer is the body is the home of Olam Haba. You see, that's the answer. Except because of the sin of Adam Rishon and the effect that it had on all of us, that body has to be what? Decontaminated or cleansed. And the way the Baruch Hashem cleanses that body is it's taking the neshama out. First, take the thing apart again, clean up the parts, and then put it back together. And that's what Tchias HaMesim is. And what the Torah tells us, that in the time after the Mashiach arrives, long after he arrives, there will be something called Tchias HaMesim.
Why are you going back?
Well, how much time that will take after is a discussion, it's a controversy, it's an argument, it's a machlokas, exactly how long that will take. Some say 40 years after Mashiach arrives, some say longer, but that's not what's relevant. What is relevant is that it takes place after the Mashiach arrives, not before. And that's something we'll understand later on as we go down the line. But basically this is what happens. The purpose of Tchias HaMesim is to clean the body which was contaminated. To resurrect a body after it was cleaned, you see. And it was cleaned through its deterioration of the ground. And that's really what it is. Therefore, that's the purpose of Adam Rishon. Adam Rishon now must be involved in the process of removing the kilkel. And in Hebrew, the removal of kilkel is called tahara. That's what it's called. To remove the tumah which lies in the physical universe and in the neshama also is called tahara. Tahara is the function of removing the damage after the sin. Once this kilkel is removed and you simply want to elevate the body to the highest level, that's called zichroch or kedusha. It's a different process. Tahara is a cleansing process. Kedusha is an elevating process where you make something holy. Tahara is where you make something clean or pure. Wait. Let me just be clear about this. When Adam was first created, he was created with a body that would never die. Because there was no need for it. It was his job to take that body and elevate it so that it's completely transparent to the Shekhinah. That was his job. He failed the job. Instead, he damaged the body. So the Baruch Hashem now has to go through a whole different process. What's the process? Adam Rishon now has to die. Means what? That the neshama of Adam Rishon has to go out of his body and temporarily stored away. The body goes into the ground, deteriorates, loses its tumah, and then the Baruch Hashem takes that body, reconstructs it, and now it's a complete body again, right? Then he takes the neshama where it was in Gan Eden, puts it back in, and suddenly the person wakes up alive. At that point, you see, he is again translucent. And he's got to go back up to transparent. Very basic process. Now what does all this have to do with us? This was Adam's mistake. Why are we suffering? Because the answer is, when Adam failed to do what he did, his neshama was split into many, many different fragments. As I've said many times, if you take the neshama of all the people who have ever been made from the beginning of time till now, and you put it together into one super neshama, that super neshama was the neshama of Adam Rishon. Before he sinned, yes. Before the sin of Adam Rishon, Adam had the neshama of everyone and all of mankind. That's the neshama of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, everyone, all the Tanoim, all the Nevi'im, all the Morim, all the Mishanim, the Achronim, all of Klal Yisrael, and all of the Goyim. Every neshama that has ever been made was what? Was in one super neshama called Adam Rishon before he sinned. It's astounding. That's how big he was. After he sinned, that neshama was fragmented into parts, pieces. And he himself became reduced to only one fraction of what he was before. So that he only had a piece of neshama. And all these other pieces became separate people. And all of it became mankind. So mankind, as a totality, descended from Adam Rishon, not only physically, but spiritually. So that what once used to be the one big great neshama of Adam Rishon is distributed among all of mankind from one generation to the other. Therefore, when we say that Adam Rishon damaged his neshama, in effect, he damaged this incredible super neshama. So that when this neshama was fragmented and split into many pieces, and it became many different people, that tumah went to all the people as well. So all of us are a piece of what Adam Rishon was before he sinned. And we all have to undo the damage that he did, plus the damage that we do when we sin. Because the process is exactly the same. Every time you commit a sin, you add opaqueness to your body. You add tumah, which means that you have to undo the same damage that he did. And this is what's been going on since the beginning of time. Therefore, the whole world has nothing more than two different processes. The world, or people in the world, are either preoccupied with what? Tahara, removing the damage of a sin, or Kedusha, bringing down Kedusha into your neshama, so that when the time comes, you can elevate your body into a transparent state. Those are the two main processes which are going on, and there are no others. In your life, everything that happens to you in your life either revolves on Tahara or revolves on Kedusha. That's it. Every time you come into a circumstance in your life, God is either cleansing you or He's testing you. And He's testing you to see what kind of you're going to do with the mitzvahs, so that He wants to see how much Kedusha you'll bring down. If Adam Rishon had not sinned, the whole world would have been a totally different situation. Totally different. Adam Rishon would have had children, but not in the way that we know it. And the neshamas that would have descended from him would have been aspects of his own person, of his own neshama. It would not have been separate people in the way that we know it. Exactly what it would have been is not clear. But we do know that the structure of the world and the entire structure of human history would have been totally different. That one sin altered the course of all human history in a completely different direction. That's what we do know. Also, the number of neshamas that we see today would not have existed. You see. Would not have existed. There would have been far fewer neshamas, for the simple reason that there was no necessity to further fragment the neshamas to such a level. Because what fragments the neshama is a sin. I don't know if you realize it or not, for example, but if in your life you devote yourself not to doing mitzvahs, but essentially you devote yourself to doing what you want to do and completely disregard what the Baruch Hashem says, what will happen is that your neshama will be split and fragmented again, and you will become a fraction of what you are in a different time. That's right. The same thing which happened to Adam can happen to every individual also. Whatever kedusha you possess in your neshama, whatever power you possess in your neshama, which gives you a certain place in Olam Haba, can be completely fractioned and halved. You see, because what happens is that you're found not worthy of it, then your neshama is further broken down, and those pieces become separate people. And you lose an enormous amount that you once had. It can be a frightening prospect to realize what can be in store for you. In other words, what happened to Adam can happen to every individual. We are no more exempt from that process, that fragmentation that he was. The neshamas of each generation come from the neshamas of the one before that split off, plus the neshamas that never came down yet. In the total neshama of Adam Rishon, there were certain souls that come down in different times. Not all of them come down at the same time. That's number one. So that the neshamas are continuously brought down to the world to live our life and to see what they do. Each neshama is a person who has a certain portion of Olam Haba, and he has the ability to acquire aspects of Olam Haba. Different neshamas come down in different generations, depending on what they have to do to earn Olam Haba. But, in addition to that, in that generation, the people who have failed to do what they did, in one way or another, their neshamas are also broken, and those fragments go down to further generations and become other people, you see. So that at any point in time, in every generation, all the people of that world are composed of the neshamas that never came down, all neshamas that are broken off from the ones before, and now have a chance to do something on their own, which they were not able to do when they were connected to others before. Now, the question is the following, and this is the thing, and here we get set to the important concept that we've said before, and which captures what we're saying now. If Adam Rishon, as we see, did not sin, he would never have been involved in the concept of Tahara, because he would never have damaged his neshama. All he would have been involved in is bringing down more and more spiritual powers to Neshama Kedusha to elevate his growth so that it becomes completely transparent to the Shekhinah. Fine. Let's say that would have happened. So, what would have happened? Would there have been a death? No. There would never have been death. So there would never have been a resurrection of the dead. Okay. What about the Mashiach? Would there have been a Mashiach? Interesting question. It appears that they wouldn't. The answer is that there would have been a Mashiach. And the answer is that Adam Rishon was supposed to be the Mashiach. Adam Rishon was the essence of the Mashiach himself. What do I mean? Because as we've said before, what is the Mashiach? The Mashiach is really, in a way, not a person. It is really a state of mind. It is a person only in a small way. But in a real way, the Mashiach is a state of mind. Meaning the following. If Adam Rishon had brought down all the Kedusha that was necessary to elevate the world into a transparent state, he would have become completely aware of the presence of the Shekhinah. That is awareness is called the Messianic awareness. That is the light of the Mashiach. The light of the Mashiach is nothing more than the awareness of the Shekhinah the way it's supposed to have been. That's what the light of the Mashiach is. That light would have come to Adam, because what would have come down to Adam is a special neshama called the Yechidah. It is a special neshama that has never come down yet. It is the highest of all neshamas. And that would have come down onto the neshama of Adam Rishon, connected to it, and suddenly Adam, with that neshama, would have become aware of all the things that he was totally ignorant of before. He would have understood everything that happens from one end of the world to the other, instantly, from that neshama. That neshama is like a crown. It sits on top of his regular neshama, like a crown sits on a head, you see. And that crown is like a lens that gives an incredible amount of insight. Suddenly Adam would have become totally aware of the presence of the Shekhinah. That neshama is what would have done it, the Yechidah. That's the power which also would have transformed the world into a whole new world itself. There's another name for that neshama. Besides the Yechidah, that neshama is also called Melech HaMashiach. When you see the word Melech HaMashiach, or the King Mashiach, it talks about that neshama, the Yechidah. It talks about that neshama which has never come down yet, and which when it does come down and rests on another neshama, suddenly that other neshama reaches the highest level of awareness. So therefore, if Adam had not sinned, he would have become the Melech HaMashiach. He would have been the Mashiach, because he would have created Olam Haba, and that's all the Melech HaMashiach is. It is a process of creation. It is a process whereby a person, through his mitzvahs, or through his maisim, elevates reality, so that suddenly the Shekhinah becomes completely present. That's all it really is. The man who does that is the Mashiach. That's it. The man who converts the physical world to a spiritual world, who achieves what's called Zichur HaGuf, who goes from Cheson to Shleimus, he becomes the Mashiach. And if Adam had done that, he would have been the Mashiach. This is an important point. The Mashiach is not somebody who can come to save us in the way that we know. This is partly true, but that's not the essence of the Mashiach. The essence of the Mashiach is not somebody who's going to come and take us out of the land of what? Of Golus, and bring us to Eretz Yisrael, right? And do that. That's not the Ikar. That's not the main thing. It is true, but that's a secondary item. It sounds like a shock to most people. But that's not what it is. The essence of the Mashiach is simply the individual who has the ability to take Olam Hazeh, this physical world, and elevate it to Olam Haba. That's the Mashiach, because that is what God wants. And that's the most important thing of all. That is the Melech HaMashiach. If Adam Rishon had never sinned, he would have done that. He would have been the Melech HaMashiach. Now, the question is, what about the thing that we read about Hagoyel, the Redeemer, the Melech HaMashiach, who will come and take us all out and so on? Who is that guy? Okay, that is a different aspect of Mashiach who never existed before until Adam sinned. And here is the essence. Until Adam sinned, before he sinned, the whole tikkun means correction of the world, lay in going from chasson to shlemus, from translucence to transparency, from a world which is unclear about the Shekhinah to a world which becomes clear about the Shekhinah. Now the whole problem with that world was the fact that that world couldn't see very well, but that world wasn't blind. You see, that's Adam Rishon before he sinned. So therefore, the essential process of tikkun, or of correction, is a process of going up. That's the Mashiach. The Mashiach is a tikkun. That's all. The Mashiach is nothing more than a tikkun of the Shekhinah in a hidden state. Whatever it takes to take that Shekhinah back is called Mashiach. That's what Mashiach is. It brings the Shekhinah back so that the world has a full spirituality. Mashiach therefore is the tikkun of the hefta, or the concealment of the Shekhinah. That's what Mashiach means. Now, before Adam sinned, that tikkun simply was what? Removing the physical body as a barrier. But after he sinned, that tikkun was much. Since the essence of the Mashiach is nothing more than tikkun, meaning the correction of whatever's wrong, and what's wrong with this world? What's wrong with this world? What's wrong with this world is that the Shekhinah is missing. And because the Shekhinah is missing, we cannot experience the full simcha that we're capable of. That's what's wrong with this world. Although other people would say there are other things wrong with this world, but they're mistaken. They're mistaken. What's wrong with this world is that the Shekhinah is missing. Because once the Shekhinah comes back, everything is corrected. There are no more diseases, there's no more poverty, there are no more sorrows, there are no more any of these things. All of these things have to do with the fact that the Shekhinah goes further and further away. That's the real essence of what's going on. So therefore the tikkun of the hester of the Shekhinah, or the tikkun of the concealment of the Shekhinah, is the Mashiach. That's the thing. If somebody asks you what the Mashiach is, this is the real answer. The tikkun for the heft of the Shekhinah. That is the intelligent answer to give, although the person will not know what you're talking about. But that's the essence. Now, if that's what the Mashiach is, we have to analyze what the tikkun of a hester is, of concealment. Obviously, before the sin of Adam Rishon, the tikkun was different than after the sin. And therefore, there now arises two Mashiachs. Because there's a different tikkun. The tikkun of going from chasson to shlemus, or the tikkun of simply taking the body from a translucent to a transparent state, is called the Mashiach ben David. That's the name of that tikkun. Mashiach ben David. Forget about why it's called the Mashiach ben David. That's a different thing, but that's what it's called. Mashiach ben David refers to the tikkun of Adam before the sin. The tikkun of the Shekhinah before the sin is synonymous with the Mashiach ben David. Once Adam sinned and he contaminated the world, the tikkun now changed, and there was an additional tikkun to remove what? The contamination. That tikkun is called the Mashiach ben Yosef. Mashiach ben Yosef. So that now, because of the sin of Adam Rishon, there are two Mashiachs. One is called the Mashiach ben Yosef, and one is called the Mashiach ben David. And each one represents a different process of tikkun. Now, in the end of time, well, hopefully this year, when the Mashiach does arrive, there will be two of them, not one. Because there are two Mashiachs. One is called the Mashiach ben Yosef, who arrives first, and the other one is called the Mashiach ben David, who arrives second. Each one does the process which I've just described, except that each one of these people is the end of the process. When the process of Tahara finishes, the last person who puts the finishing touches is called the Mashiach ben Yosef. He is in charge of removing the tumah. That's what he's in charge. He is in charge of removing the impurity in the world. He is in charge of running after the Kedusha, which is in the hidden dark places in the Klippas. He is bringing it back. Therefore, he is in charge of taking the Jews out of Golus, out of their exile. Why? Because what is exile? Exile is nothing more than the Kedusha in a dark, hidden place. Why? What concept is that? Because if you recall, if you remember what I said, when a person does a mitzvah, he brings down the Kedusha into his neshama. And that Kedusha allows him to elevate his body. But if a person does a sin, he brings a tumah into his body. Remember I said that? But he does more than that. He allows the tumah to come into his neshama also. And what happens then? What happens then is that tumah surrounds his neshama and his body, and what it does is it holds the Kedusha that's in the neshama and holds it captive. Which means that now the neshama has to be released from this tumah. And that's the process of tahara. How does a person release the tumah on his neshama that he does, that he acquires by what? Doing sins. He releases it several ways. The first way that he releases it is by tshuva, by repenting. When a person does tshuva, even though he doesn't realize it, what he's doing is he's releasing or removing the tumah which invaded his consciousness and throwing it out. If a person doesn't want to do tshuva, he doesn't want to repent, then the Baruch Shem says, I will remove it for him. And how does God remove tumah which has invaded your neshama? By Yisurin or tzoros. That's the essence of tzoros. When a person goes through suffering in life, that suffering is cleansing the tumah which has invaded his neshama because of the sins that he has done. And that's why people suffer. But the suffering is designed to cleanse or to remove, because since the person won't do it by himself, the Baruch Shem says, I will do it for him. Let me just make one thing clear here. When I say Mashiach ben David refers to the tikkun of simply elevating the physical world to a spiritual level. It's called after David HaMelech. It is. And there's a reason for that. Even though David HaMelech would be born later on. But it's called that because what happened was very simple. There's a medrash, and I've said this before, there's a medrash that says that when Adam Rishon looked in the future, he saw David HaMelech, and he saw that David HaMelech was supposed to die at birth. He saw he was supposed to die right away. So Adam Rishon was supposed to live 1,000 years, said to God, I will give him 70 years of my life. So that's when Adam Rishon only lived for 930 years. And the 70 years of Adam Rishon's life, he gave to David HaMelech. And that's why David HaMelech lived till 70 years old, and he died at 70. Now the questions are, why did Adam Rishon give 70 years to David HaMelech? There are a lot of people who die at birth. Why was he special with Malachim on David? The answer is the following. Because of the fact that Adam Rishon sinned, he destroyed the tikkun of what? Of Zichuk or Kedusha. Remember, when Adam Rishon sinned, he didn't raise the world. He brought it down. Which means that he destroyed the tikkun that has to do with bringing the Shekhinah into the world itself. Because he destroyed that, David HaMelech, who would be born later on, who would follow in Adam Rishon's footsteps, was supposed to die. So Adam Rishon said, I will therefore give him my years, because I killed David HaMelech. I killed David HaMelech. Because David HaMelech was supposed to be one of the individuals, you see, that's supposed to take over this power. But I just spoiled the power, and so I killed him. That's why David HaMelech was supposed to die when he was born, because of the sin of Adam Rishon. That's why Adam said, I will give David HaMelech the years to go on, so that the process which I could not complete, he will finish off. That's why that process is called the Mashiach ben David process. And that's why the word Adam, right? Aleph Daled Mem stands for Adam, David, Mashiach. Adam, David, Mashiach. Because it's really all the same thing. Adam was supposed to be David HaMelech, and he was supposed to be Mashiach. He was supposed to do what David did, and he was supposed to be Mashiach. He failed. So that process now had to go on many years ahead into a person called David HaMelech. So we call that process the Mashiach ben David process. You see. It's the same thing with the Mashiach ben Yosef process. That process is a process of Tahara, taking back the Kedusha from the dark place. Taking back the Kedusha from where it fell when a person sins. When a person sins, he takes Kedusha and he throws it out into the Tumah, and the Tumah swallows the Kedusha and becomes stronger. That's what happens when a person sins. So it's the person's job now to go and take it back. That process is called the Mashiach ben Yosef process. And that process started as soon as Adam Rishon sinned. You see. Because what happened, as soon as Adam Rishon sinned, the Shekhinah went further away. Not only went further away, when Adam Rishon sinned, the Shekhinah went into the Tumah, or into the Klippa. It went into a darkness. When Adam Rishon was first made, the Shekhinah was simply outside of the physical world, so to speak, and simply Adam could not see it clearly. But after Adam sinned, a terrible thing happened. The Shekhinah, or this power, you see, of Kedusha itself, suddenly went into a very dark area. It went into the area of Tumah itself. So that now, if you want the Shekhinah back, it's not simply a matter of reaching up. It's a matter now of dragging it out of its own prison, which is the Tumah where it lives now. Do you see how much worse it is now? Do you see what Adam did by the fact that he sinned, and what we do every time we do a chet? Every time we do a chet, we drive a piece of the Shekhinah, so to speak, into a deeper, deeper abyss. Not that it's missing, but that literally it's trapped somewhere else. So that our job now comes to release it, to remove it from the trap. And that process of removing it from a trap in which we placed it, when we denied this Bnei Shalom, it's called the Mashiach ben Yosef process. Why is it called Yosef, even though Yosef wasn't involved for many years? Because Yosef, all the way down the line, became the person who is the center now of that process. After Adam Rishon failed. And we will get into that. Just like David HaMelech became the main center of the process of Zichur, Yosef became the essence of Tahara. And we shall get into that next time. But we call it Mashiach ben Yosef at this point in time to show you the concept of that process. So, in very simple review, if we may say, there are two tikkunim, or two corrections. And it's very important to remember this, because this is the essence of all creation. There is nothing else that goes on but this. When God created the world at the outset, He created a person to do a certain job. That job is called the tikkun of the Shekhinah, to bring it back into the world. Or that job was called the Mashiach ben David job. When Adam failed, he drove the Shekhinah further away and forced it to go into a trap. So a new job became necessary, called the Mashiach ben Yosef job. And the function of that job was to bring the Shekhinah back. We therefore see that these two tikkunim, the tikkun of the Mashiach ben David and the tikkun of Mashiach ben Yosef, are really processes, such that when they finally end and they come to their finish, they will be represented by two people who will finally finish off the job. The man who is the end of that process is called the Mashiach ben Yosef. Even though in each and every Jew there's a piece of Mashiach ben Yosef. Because each and every Jew has to bring back the piece of Shechina which is connected to him. So each and every Jew has a piece of a Mashiach ben Yosef. And each and every Jew has a piece of a Mashiach ben David. You see. Just like Adam had both pieces in him. Every Jew who comes from Adam had both pieces in him. And every Jew has to do both of these jobs. In the end, these two processes will culminate or climax in two men who will finish it off finally. The man who finishes off the Tahara process, who takes the Shechina out of the Tumah, out of the Klipa, and out of the Golus, who takes the Shechina out of its exile, will take the Jews out of their exile. Because the Jews are in exile, because the Shechina is also in exile. When the Shechina leaves its Tumah and its prison, the Jews will leave their prison, which is Golus, the exile as we see it. That's why the man who will take the Jews and bring them back to Israel and take them out of the nations of the world is the Mashiach ben Yosef. After he finishes his thing and the Jews are living in Israel, there will appear the second person who has the full power of the Mashiach ben David. And he will take the Jews who live in Israel at that point in time and bring in an enormous new level of Kedusha, so that suddenly, from his time, he will usher in the next stage called Olam Haba. Next time, what I'd like to do is to investigate, you see, the evolution of that process of Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David in the Torah itself, by analyzing what happened with Yosef. How was the Mashiach ben Yosef born? Who was the first Mashiach ben Yosef, so to speak? And who was the first Mashiach ben David? And I'd like to analyze how that process moves at certain critical periods throughout human history, to see how that process literally has represented itself in different points. And then from there, we will begin to analyze what those two processes will look like at the end of time, to find out what will happen when the two Mashiachs appear at the end, which will be the final ultimate redemption of Gula.